As the world mourned the loss of Prince Philip, few realized that his final hours were shrouded in whispers, sealed letters, and an ominous request that would ignite a royal firestorm. What began as a gentle moment between father and son would soon shake the very foundation of the monarchy. Amid the ceremonial mourning, veiled black attire, and a nation brought to stillness, something far more consequential stirred within the quiet corridors of Windsor Castle, something the cameras didn't catch, and the public was never meant to know. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Prince Philip, often described as stoic and unshakable, became notably reflective in his final weeks. Those close to him said his words turned from public duty to personal legacy. He spent more time with select family members, most notably his youngest son, Prince Edward. The two were seen walking in the gardens, seated beside each other in the drawing room, speaking in hushed tones that aides avoided interrupting. In one particularly private conversation, Philip, with a trembling yet deliberate voice, told Edward, "You must guard the future. I trust you, not just as a son, but as a father." That cryptic phrase lingered like a chill through the air, its full weight unknown even to Edward in that moment. But the true storm was yet to begin. Following Philip's funeral, a modest leather pouch worn, unmarked and tucked beneath personal effects, was handed discreetly to Edward by a trusted aide. Inside was a single sealed envelope bearing the Duke's emblem. The handwriting was unmistakably Philip's. Edward didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he kept it locked away in a drawer, almost fearful of what might be written within. The grief was still fresh, and the burden of curiosity was drowned beneath responsibility. Still, the envelope loomed in his thoughts, casting a long shadow over every royal engagement, every formal appearance, every passing day. Weeks turned into months, but Edward remained haunted by the sealed letter. He would often sit in silence, hands hovering over the drawer, torn between the need to honor his father's privacy and the creeping sense that the contents were never meant to stay hidden. Sophie noticed his withdrawal, his late-night pacing, his distant gaze. One evening she asked simply, "Is there something you haven't told me?" But Edward said nothing, only staring at the fire as if the flames might somehow burn away the weight of the secret. The monarchy, meanwhile, believed the chapter had closed. Public attention shifted elsewhere. Yet behind the stone walls of the palace, something ancient stirred, something potent enough to upend titles, legacies, and royal destinies. That single sheet of paper, still untouched, held a truth that refused to remain silent. But when the monarchy believed the dust had settled, a single sheet of paper hidden in a leather pouch would bring the storm they never saw coming. It wasn't an official proclamation. It wasn't signed in gold or stamped with royal wax. But what lay in Prince Philip's handwriting carried a legacy far heavier than tradition, one that named, not Edward, but a teenage royal, as the next Duke of Edinburgh. The letter, now finally opened after weeks of silent torment, bore the unmistakable scrawl of a man who had lived through war, duty, and unrelenting scrutiny. Its words were clear, deliberate, almost chilling in their quiet certainty. "To James, Viscount 7, it began, goes the title I once carried with pride. He will not inherit burden but possibility, a clean lineage, unspoiled, unshaken." Edward stared at the page, his breath caught in his throat, the weight of both fatherhood and legacy pressing against his chest like an avalanche. The note didn't read like a casual wish, it was a command, cloaked in affection. Philip had seen something in his grandson that reminded him of himself. Not a loud presence, not a headline maker, but a boy of few words and quiet strength. Philip's choice wasn't about popularity or public profile. It was about restoring the essence of the dukedom. He wrote of his own youth, the feeling of being an outsider in the royal machine, and how that very distance gave him clarity. James, he wrote, knows silence. He knows when to speak and when to listen. That is the steel no one sees. These words, penned in the final stretch of Philip's life, cut through centuries of royal expectation and rewrote the line of succession not with fanfare but with resolve. Edward, upon reading the note aloud to Sophie in their private quarters, was overcome with an emotion he couldn't name. Pride, perhaps. Shock, certainly. But above all, conflict. For years there had been whispers that Edward would one day carry his father's title. It had been an unspoken certainty. He had never asked for it, but he had shaped his public service around it. Now it was being handed not down to him, but past him. Sophie, usually composed and pragmatic, was visibly shaken. Her hand trembled as she reached for the letter. She read it again and again, searching for ambiguity that wasn't there. "He's just a boy," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't know what this means." Edward understood. Sophie wasn't objecting, she was protecting. For James, still navigating adolescence away from the royal spotlight, this letter could become a spotlight of its own. Sophie begged Edward to keep the contents private, to delay the inevitable, to allow their son more time in peace. But Edward also knew what his father had asked of him, not to hold the future back, but to guard it. The language of the letter was filled with symbols, veiled in personal memory. References to young Philip's years in exile, to the anonymity of boarding schools, to the forging of character outside the royal gaze. Philip had chosen James precisely because he hadn't been corrupted by power, because he hadn't yet become what others expected him to be. Edward folded the letter slowly, reverently, and locked it away once more. But the decision had already been made. Philip's final wish lived now not just on paper, but in Edward's silence and in James's unknowing destiny. The promise of a new chapter was written, but secrets don't survive long behind palace walls, and this one was already slipping through the cracks of ancient stone. King Charles expected a quiet morning briefing. Instead, he was handed a royal note that struck him like a thunderclap. His late father had bypassed protocol, tradition, and even the king himself. And the real heir to a cherished title was still in school. The chamber at Clarence House, usually filled with routine agenda and measured tones, fell into a breathless silence as Edward, with an unreadable expression, reached into his jacket and laid the sealed letter on the polished oak table. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. The royal crest alone drew the attention of every senior aide, every private secretary, and most of all the king. Charles leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked, almost dreading the answer. Edward nodded solemnly. The room shifted. The mood soured. No one had anticipated that Prince Philip's legacy would come roaring back to life like this, not in the form of sentiment, but in the shape of a direct challenge to royal tradition. Charles opened the envelope hymns. Elf. What he read struck at the core of his monarchy. Not because it was legally binding, it wasn't, but because it was emotionally devastating. Philip's wishes were clear, unwavering, and etched in the ink of conviction. The Duke of Edinburgh title, long expected to pass quietly to Edward, was instead to be gifted to a young royal untouched by scandal and untainted by entitlement, James. Philip's language was precise and personal. Let it pass to the boy. Let it live on unbroken. Charles's hands trembled slightly as he set the letter down. There was no denying his father's words. But neither could he ignore what it meant for royal protocol, for power, for perception. He looked to Edward, then to the gathered aides, but it was Camilla's voice that broke the silence. She leaned forward, calm but firm. "This isn't official. It never went through the Privy Council. There's still time to contain this." Contain. That word lingered in the air like smoke. Edward's face hardened. "This isn't something to contain. This is Father's final request." The tension between them sparked like dry tinder. Camilla cautioned against upending the hierarchy for sentiment. She warned that the monarchy survives on consistency, not emotion, but Charles wasn't listening anymore. His thoughts spiraled between loyalty to a father who never fully yielded and the weight of being a king trying to maintain order in a house built on silent rules and unspoken understandings. Edward, in a voice low and shaking but resolute, read the final line of the letter aloud. "Titles are not earned by age or seniority, but by soul." The words rang out like a verdict. And just like that, the room shifted again. What had begun as a routine meeting had become a royal reckoning. No one dared speak. Even Charles remained still, staring at the letter as though it had rewritten the very blueprint of his reign. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "This changes everything." The words echoed through the walls of Clarence's house. But they did not mark an end, only the beginning of a deeper fracture. And while Charles grappled with betrayal from beyond the grave, another royal figure was already preparing to ensure the Duke's wish wouldn't die in silence. He wasn't ready for a crown, a title, or even the cameras. But in the blink of an eye, young James Wessex went from private schoolboy to centre of a brewing royal storm, his name now synonymous with a title soaked in generations of pride and power. For most of his life, James had lived on the outer rim of royal life, comfortably out of focus. He attended school like any other child, walked beside his parents without fanfare, and quietly disappeared during high-profile events. While the spotlight swirled around his cousins, some shattering tradition, others upholding it, James remained untouched. Until now. Until a single letter, written by a grandfather he adored, turned the course of his life without his consent. The name James, Viscount Severn, had barely crossed tabloid headlines before. Suddenly, it was everywhere. As whispers of Prince Philip's note spread beyond Clarence's house, a dangerous curiosity was unleashed. Anonymous sources began to leak the story. Rumors hinted at a hidden document, a deviation from protocol, a chosen successor not approved by the king. James, still recovering from exams, was ambushed by the noise. Paparazzi began circling his school gates. Journalists pored over grainy childhood photos, desperate for any detail that might signal he had been destined for the title. In corridors once filled with harmless teasing, schoolmates now treated him like royalty. Some with awe, others with jealousy. The ordinary had evaporated, and with it James's peace. At home, the mood was no calmer. Sophie, who had fought to protect her children from royal scrutiny, felt the ground shift beneath her. One evening, finding James sitting alone in his room, she knelt beside him. "Am I supposed to be a duke now?" he asked her. The question hung in the air like smoke, filling the room with uncertainty. Sophie's heart cracked. She wanted to say no. She wanted to promise him that the world wouldn't demand anything from him he wasn't ready to give. But she couldn't, because the crown had already started moving, and once its machinery awakens, it rarely stops for innocence. Edward, too, found himself trapped between fatherhood and duty. He tried to reason with advisors, tried to slow the narrative, but even he could see the shift. The firm had caught wind of the letter, and the firm never forgets a deviation. One official casually referred to James as the young duke in waiting during a lunch at Sandringham. The moment pierced Edward like a knife. This wasn't a whisper anymore, it was an agenda. He urged courtiers to shield his son, to preserve what little normalcy remained. But it was too late. Once a royal child becomes a symbol, their childhood ends. And James, now only beginning to grasp the world he had been thrust into, bore it all with quiet confusion. He didn't ask for attention, he didn't seek power, but he had inherited something far more volatile: expectation. A legacy had found him before he even understood its weight, and all the while, behind the palace walls, strategy had begun to form in silence. Eyes had turned cold, minds had grown calculating. Yet, while James reeled from newfound fame, powerful voices inside the firm were scheming to erase Prince Philip's dying wish altogether. Behind the palace walls, Queen Camilla's voice echoed like thunder. To her, the idea of granting the historic Duke of Edinburgh title to a teenager, not a senior working royal, was not only absurd, it was dangerous. And she was prepared to fight it. The Queen Consort had spent years cementing her position within a family that once saw her as an outsider. She understood better than most that power within the monarchy wasn't just about blood, it was about control. And now, that control was slipping. Challenged by a letter from a man no longer alive, and by a boy not yet old enough to vote. Camilla wasted no time. She confronted King Charles directly, her words sharp and deliberate. "You're allowing sentiment to override structure," she warned. "What happens when every royal writes a dying wish that contradicts the crown?" Charles, already torn between legacy and leadership, didn't answer. But Camilla knew silence was not surrender, it was hesitation. And hesitation could be shaped. In private meetings, she began planting seeds among senior courtiers, arguing that the monarchy could not be governed by emotion. If Philip's note was honoured, what message would that send? that written wishes now outweighed tradition, that a teenager could leapfrog over working royals simply because he carried the late Duke's favour. She insisted that titles were more than symbols, they were tools. Tools that had to be placed in hands that could wield them, not merely inherit them. The tension with Sophie escalated swiftly. Behind closed doors, the two women clashed over James's future. Sophie, protective and poised, accused Camilla of turning the crown into a chessboard. Camilla, cold and unyielding, countered that Sophie was blinded by maternal instinct. "This is not about your son," she snapped. "This is about the survival of the monarchy." The conversation ended not in agreement but in silence, thick, furious silence that spread through the palace halls like a warning. Meanwhile, Camilla had already taken her campaign further. She summoned senior advisors in secret and instructed them to prepare a list of alternative candidates for the Edinburgh title. Trusted, visible, controllable names. Loyal to the crown, loyal to her. A draft statement was prepared, designed to diffuse public intrigue and offer a neutral explanation for the title's reassignment. But according to insiders, Camilla was seen tearing the document in half, just days later, its tone too passive, too conciliatory. She needed strength, not softness. This was no longer a quiet maneuver. It was a battle for direction, and she would not lose to a ghost or a boy. And so the divide grew wider. Charles remained trapped in a silent storm, caught between honouring his father's wishes and preserving the integrity of his rule. James remained oblivious to the power struggle erupting in his name. And Camilla? She prepared for war, determined to ensure that a single letter wouldn't upend decades of carefully sculpted royal order. But just as royal divisions deepened, one unlikely royal emerged with enough weight to force everyone to listen. Princess Anne has long walked in her father's shadow, quietly embodying his spirit. But now, with the memory of Philip at stake, she breaks her silence, delivering a message that would shake the monarchy's internal power structure to its core. For years, Anne had carried her father's legacy not in words but in action, discipline, discretion, and an unwavering devotion to duty. While others courted attention or clashed with tradition, Anne remained constant, unshaken. But even her iron restraint fractured when whispers of Philip's private note surfaced. She requested no formal audience. She didn't demand protocol. She simply asked Edward and Sophie to meet her privately, away from royal ears and eyes. And when Edward placed the letter into her hands, she read it in a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. Then, without looking up, she uttered 6 words that cut through the air. Like steel, this is Father's voice, pure and clear. There was no hesitation in her tone, no doubt in her gaze. Anne recognized the rhythm of Philip's phrasing, the conviction in his words, the unmistakable clarity of a man who never minced truth. She turned to Edward, and for the first time in years, the siblings shared something unspoken and understanding that went beyond the letter itself. It was not just a dying wish, it was Philip's final stand. Anne urged Edward not to back down, but more than that, she urged Charles to look beyond legality. "You were his son," she said to the king days later in a private exchange. "But I was his mirror. I know what he meant." She did not plead, she did not manipulate, she reminded. The divide between Anne and Camilla became palpable. The frost between them at royal functions drew quiet glances, hushed speculations. Anne no longer indulged in performative unity. When Camilla attempted to steer conversations toward traditional hierarchies and expected roles, Anne would interrupt, pointedly referencing father's decision with unmistakable weight. Her presence alone became an act of defiance. She wasn't just disagreeing, she was defending, not merely a boy, but a principle, a promise. And as the palace press office scrambled to maintain a facade of unity, insiders noted Anne's increased time spent with James, guiding him quietly, instilling in him the values Philip had once instilled in her. She didn't coddle, she prepared, and behind every glance, every sentence, every appearance, Anne was sending a clear message to Charles. If he chose to ignore the note, he wouldn't just be overruling his father, he would be silencing his essence. For a man who had lived in Philip's shadow, who had fought so long for approval he rarely received, the prospect of denying that final wish was unbearable. The pressure mounted not from public outcry, Tea from the sister who knew their father better than anyone else and wasn't afraid to say so. As Anne's influence surged, Charles faced a devastating realization. If he defied the note, he risked becoming the monarch who silenced his own father's will. In the hallowed halls of royal governance, whispers of succession turned into war cries of division. The Royal Advisory Council, once united under Charles's vision, now stood fractured, caught between legacy, loyalty, and one boy's uncertain future. What had begun as a single document, a note penned by a dying duke, had now snowballed into a constitutional crisis. Buckingham Palace summoned its most senior advisors for an emergency meeting behind closed doors. The stakes were no longer symbolic, they were seismic. The decision to honor or dismiss Prince Philip's final wish would not only shape James's destiny, it would reshape the monarchy's image for generations to come. And within that chamber, where history often chose its course in silence, voices were raised, lines were drawn, and loyalties tested. On one side sat the legalists, those bound to the statutes and the sovereignty of precedents. They argued the note held no legal weight, no royal seal, no formal directive. For them, it was a deeply personal letter, not a mandate. On the other stood the traditionalists, those who revered legacy, memory, and moral obligation. They believed Philip's voice, though gone, must still echo within the Crown's decisions. But the most vocal were the loyalists, not to structure, but to character. They argued that the monarchy's strength came not from rigidity, but from its rare moments of humanity. And it was within this whirlwind of opinion that one senior peer stood and delivered a single sentence that landed like a blow to Charles's chest. "This could define your reign." The king sat motionless, his crown heavy not on his head, but on conscience. Every decision he had made since ascending the throne had been measured, diplomatic, calculated. But this was personal, and personal decisions inside the monarchy are the most dangerous of all. Leaks began to trickle from the council room into the hands of the press. By dawn, the headlines were ablaze with speculation. Palace rift over Duke title. Will Charles defy Philip's final wish? James at center of royal tug-of-war. Public opinion fractured along generational lines. Older Britons clung to the authority of structure. Younger voices championed legacy and justice. The monarchy found itself not only internally divided, but publicly dissected. The council feared more than disagreement, it feared rupture. Some warned of a constitutional quagmire if Charles reassigned the title against Philip's publicly known wish. Others whispered of precedent being shattered, a monarchy looking lost in its own maze. And then, breaking through the tension like glass, came Sophie's voice, sharp, raw, and unfiltered. She stood up, tears brimming, and said what none dared speak aloud. This is what he wanted. Not just my son's inheritance, but his legacy, his dignity. Don't bury it because it's inconvenient. The room froze. In that moment, it wasn't a title on the table, it was a man's final truth. Yet even as the advisors argued, as tradition fought modernity, and as the monarchy teetered on the edge of scandal, the final blow came not from the council but from Prince Edward himself. In a move that stunned the world, Prince Edward stepped before the cameras, holding a framed letter and speaking the words his father never had the chance to. The world stopped, the firm froze, and James, still a boy, was quietly crowned in the hearts of millions. No palace aide had approved the broadcast, no media plan had been drawn. And yet, the footage would go on to become one of the most rewatched royal moments in a generation. With the letter clutched in his hands like a sacred heirloom, Edward stared down the lens not as a prince, but as a son and a father. His voice trembled at first, but quickly found strength. He did not begin with titles. He began with truth. My father, he said, was a man of legacy, of clarity, of conviction. And in these final words, he left no doubt about who should carry the title that meant the most to him. He then read the letter aloud, word for word. Philip's message echoed across continents. It was intimate, unwavering, and deeply personal. Let it pass to the boy. Let it live on unbroken. As Edward reached the end of the note, silence filled the airwaves. There was no grand ceremony, no royal anthem playing beneath his voice. Just the raw echo of a son fulfilling his father's final command. The emotion in Edward's delivery was unmistakable: years of service, quiet obedience, and now, a decision to step aside for someone younger, someone untouched by power. "He deserves to grow into it," Edward said, "just as our father grew into his." The reaction was immediate. Across social media, in op-eds, among royal historians and ordinary citizens alike, a wave of support surged behind James. What had once been a story of scandal had transformed into one of honor. The image of a father giving voice to a grandfather's vision stirred something deep in the national consciousness. The people saw in James not just a boy, but a symbol, a reminder that legacy is not about hierarchy, but heart. And in that moment, King Charles, watching quietly from a separate wing of the palace, is said to have wept. Hours later, in a private, almost unannounced gathering, the title of Duke of Edinburgh was formally transferred. No pageantry, no trumpets, just Charles, Edward, Anne, and James, a quiet circle bound not by ceremony but by blood, grief, and now resolution. Charles, once torn between duty and paternal shadow, chose what he called the spirit of the crown. With a slight nod, he acknowledged his father's words and the future they had now forged. But long after the applause fades and the headlines quiet, the question still lingers. What will James do with a title that once defined the unbreakable Prince Philip? They gave him a title forged in steel, silence, and service. But will James, the youngest royal caught in the fiercest storm, rise to the weight of his grandfather's shadow, or quietly reshape what it means to be Duke in a new age of monarchy? Just weeks after the televised statement that shifted the nation's perception, James made his first public appearance as the newly titled Duke of Edinburgh. No red carpet, no royal fanfare, just a visit to a youth centre. Philip once supported a quiet nod to continuity. The press waited for a headline, but James offered no performance. His composure was deliberate, almost disarming. A boy moulded by privacy now stood at the edge of tradition, unshaken by the world's gaze. He spoke few words, thanked the staff, and left the crowd with a short message. "I'm here to continue what he started." It wasn't grandiose, but it was piercing. Behind the cameras, Princess Anne stood near the exit, waiting. As the two reunited away from the public eye, she pressed a small, aged object into his palm, Prince Philip's signet ring. The same one forged decades ago. It hadn't been displayed. It hadn't been offered to Charles or Edward. Anne had kept it. And now she chose to give it to the one person she believed would understand its weight. No royal decree, no formal script, just a silent handover between the past and the future. James looked down at the ring, then up at his great-aunt. "I'll serve," he said. Not louder, but longer. It was a moment that captured the very essence of the Duke of Edinburgh title. Not fireworks, but resolve. Not spectacle, but substance. Back at Bagshot Park, Sophie reflected on the journey none of them had expected. "He was just a boy," she whispered to a friend. "But now he carries something older than any of us." Edward, too, kept his thoughts private. Yet those closest to him knew the sacrifice wasn't small. He had stepped aside not out of obligation, but out of belief. Belief in his father's final vision, and in his son's silent strength. The path wasn't easy, the transition wasn't clean, but perhaps that's what made it real. The crown, for all its opulence and grandeur, often overlooks those who walk quietly. But sometimes history remembers the ones who didn't chase it, those who were chosen by it. And James, the boy who never asked for power, now holds one of the most revered legacies in the royal family. He does not wear it with noise. He carries it with purpose. Slowly, steadily, reshaping what it means to lead not from above, but from within. And so, history was not rewritten, but revived, not with a throne, but with a note, and not by the oldest of royals, but by the youngest among them. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.